Hi everybody and welcome back to BI Navigation. In this video we're going to look at some top level difficulties, so some of the main difficulties that exist when you're setting off to model financial data and ledger data in Power BI. They are a bit tricky, and the way you overcome them is by understanding the software a little bit more. And I've been through a 2.5-year journey, and really, okay, it wasn't what I was doing all the time, but really, only in the last 12 months where I really made Power BI hum for financials. There's quite a lot to think about, and quite a lot where maybe with the benefit of my hindsight you could use some advice. But let's have a look at what those difficulties are. The first piece is actually setting up a star schema to start with. So Power BI works with what it calls a fact table, which is picture that as all your ledger numbers, and then they need to link to a set of companies, to a set of departments, to a set of dates, and to a set of formats. And they link with relationships, and if these relationships are single and going one way, then we'll have something that's optimal. And arriving at that is quite a tricky thing for financials. Very, very doable, but quite a tricky thing. And then we've got the issue of subtotals and totals. If we're looking in a sales model, then all we want is it to add up, filter, slice, add up what it's got. Power BI manages all of that fantastically. In financial situation, we need lots of subtotals and KPIs en route as we read down the page. Power BI finds that a little bit tricky. Again, overcomable, but it finds it a little bit tricky to start with. It's certainly one of the stumbling blocks if you're a beginner at Power BI. Then formatting the numbers. When you write a formula in Power BI, you give it a format. Well, that's all fine, but if you need to slide a percentage in a line, so gross profit percent would be a percent, not a whole number, or you want one or two of your KPIs to show in decimal places because 0.1 is a big variance, then that can get a little bit hard as well. Some of the foibles here that we see when we start out. Accounting signage against common sense signage is another thing. So most finance people watching this will have been here, so I'll say it very quickly. So sales are negative in accounting records and costs are positive. So you might think, well, we'll just multiply those by -1 when we bring them to here and that'll be fine. Except then your costs will become negative, and that's problematic because when you read a cost page you really want to read that positive. So there's a whole thing that's not a Power BI thing necessarily, it's an Excel thing as well, just making the numbers come onto the page so they read in common sense language. And then falling off that is the signage of variances. So again, a positive variance is green and negative variance is red. And if it's cost, the signage needs to switch around from the signage that was held in revenue, and all that. Again, in Excel is a bit tricky and a little bit tricky in Power BI just to manage through. And then the hardest bit is manipulating the trial balance and the ledger amounts and pushing those through to that star schema so everything reads right. Intuitively, an accountant, and me included, when I started this venture, would want to map a trial balance or a ledger number once and let the software do the work. Unfortunately, Power BI doesn't do that. So an example might be you've got a sales account and a cost of sales account. They'll map one for one with the ledger code, that's easy. But then the gross profit will be mapped with those two codes again, and that could cause some issues in the integrity of the numbers. So we'll need, when you see the model, we'll need some way of making sure that the accounting data adds up, because the modeling process or the manipulation process of the trial balance is is not quite intuitive for accountants, and took me a little while to get to grips with. We need to manage multiple reporting formats. That can be a little bit tricky. You see a number of Power BI models which have different format pages detached from the main model to manage this, and that just makes the DAX, makes the formula writing so much more difficult. So when you see the BI navigation model, we'll see that we're working with one reporting format which is part of the star schema, and everything else just flows off that with slicers and filters. So what's out there in terms of help, assistance? There's some really good stuff out there on some simple profit and loss. You know, your turnover, gross profit, expenses, EBITDA, interest, profit before tax, all of that stuff is really good. But there's very little out there for more complex management accounting, where you need statistics, numbers of units sold in there, profit per unit, GP percentage used, utilizations of workforce. Those sorts of things are a bit harder to come by in terms of help that's out on the internet. But some good basic stuff is there. A lot of stuff that's out there uses non-star schemas, and that's not very optimal. A lot of stuff out there uses bidirectional relationships to get the chart of accounts to map correctly, and that's not optimal. Having said that, if you run a small set of ledgers and you use those things and it's fast and it works for you, then crack on. A lot of the stuff that's been written out there is for smaller businesses, and it does work. It works very well. But as a purist here, those are not optimal Power BI pieces of functionality. What we also see out there are long switch statements. If you're an Excel user, then a switch statement is a long if statement. Again, not optimal. Microsoft did optimize the switch statement a little bit better a few weeks ago in November 2021. But even so, you really don't want long switch statements. You need to keep the main calculation engine as short as you possibly can. And there's very little out there on balance sheet and cash flow. Very, very little. There's some cracking work on the micro of aspects of the balance sheet. So on debtors and receivables. Hugh at Accountancy Insights done some cracking work for Sage users in that area, but there's very little in terms of financial statement mapping for balance sheets and cash flow. And certainly from my experience, you pick up some of these nuggets across the internet and you try and piece them together and you get something that works. But my early models had very, very long refresh times. They weren't as optimal as they could have been, and the reason for that are all those things at the top there that make things not optimal, and we can see how we've overcome some of those when we get into our model. So I'm going to round off there for this one. I hope we've done two things here, haven't we? Talked about the tricky difficulties that are in there, and we've given some pointers as to where to go to find some little bit of help. And in the next video, we'll have a look at the end result of BI Navigation's financial model, and see how that works, see how usable it is for a user, and then after that we'll move on to how we build that model and where the information comes from and what the formulae are and all of those things. So thank you for watching. Take care, and we'll see you in the next video. Thank you.